So a very warm welcome everybody to our game today. We're looking at a game from 2011 between Hikaru Nakamura, everybody's favorite streamer, perhaps, depends, and he plays Irina Krush in this game. And this is from the 2011 St. Louis Kings versus Queens tournament. And in this game, Hikaru Nakamura plays the very intriguing and my favorite opening move with white, which is one knight to c3. And one knight to c3 is very interesting because it has very complex games with intriguing tactical positions. Most often your opponent is out of book, and quite often you're out of book after a few moves as well. And in the game we get the typical opening here. Krush plays d5, the idea is to play e4, and what you're hoping for as white is really that black pushes the pawn here, because when black pushes here you can drop your knight back to knight to c2, and after you get e5 you get knight to g3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4, and something like bishop to d6. This is not the ideal opening for black, but pretty much on point. The game's completely equal, but what you see here is you want to get white on this diagonal. You want to play a4, you want to play d3, sometimes even c3. The whole idea is you've got this, get your bishop up here, your knights are jumping. It's a very intriguing and attacking game. But in the game, Krush decided to play d takes e4, and then we get knight takes e4, we get knight to d7, bishop to c4, and then Krush plays e6 because there is the opportunity perhaps of say something like knight to f6. White has an intriguing, as I said, opportunity to just sack the bishop for the pawn, brings the king out, and you get a very intriguing opening line which goes knight to g5 check, king to g8, knight to e6, queen to e8, knight takes c7, attacking both the queen and the rook. Then we get queen to g6, attacking the pawn here. We just take the rook, you get b6 to try and trap the knight in, with the idea of course of getting your bishop here attacking on this diagonal, which would end up winning the rook of course. So then you get knight f3, bishop to b7, then you get castles, and the game can continue from here. But black with a slight edge, so I'm going to take back this. So just depending, a very intriguing line, but in the game what we see in this position was e6 by Krush, just to avoid any of the complications. We get queen to e2, then we get knight to f6, then we get g5 by Hikaru, and Hikaru again just trying to line up something on these lines, of course with the queen here now as well, that's an added attacker. So we get knight to b6, and with knight to b6 this pawn is now protected by the bishop and also attacking your light square bishop, so he drops back to b3. We get h6 to attack the knight, and then we get knight back to f3. And after a5, a4, you might think, well, black, you know, they're doing well here, because black then plays bishop to e7. You'll see that black has got 3 pieces developed. White's got 2 pieces developed with the queen, which is 3 pieces, but really you want to be developing your minor pieces. So you think, oh, maybe black is slightly edging it. Engine has this as a slight advantage, very slight advantage for white. We get knight to e5 by Hikaru, and then we get castles. Then we get knight to f3. We get knight f to b5, which is a mistake, and after castles and bishop to d7. These are inaccuracies by Irina Krush, and we can see instead of playing there, if had played something like knight to f4 to attack Hikaru's queen. Well, look at this following line. We get queen to e4, then we get knight to d5, we get d4, knight to h5, rook to e1, c5, then we get bishop to d2, knight to back to f6, then you get queen to h4, you give up the pawn here with white, drop back to g3, then attack the queen with the knight, bring up your queen, and now we're getting this really interesting attack for white. After rook, something like rook to a6, if you get bishop takes h6, g takes h6, queen takes h6, knight to h7, and then rook to e4, where we're seeing that white has a very, very interesting attack coming up along the way, along the lines. Yeah, very interesting stuff indeed. But of course, in the game, we didn't get all that. We get bishop to d7 by Irina Krush, which Hikaru then played d4. Now, after c5 and d takes c5, we get bishop takes on c5 by Irina Krush. Then we get rook to d1, knight to f6 back. Then we get g4 by Hikaru. And what a great move this is by Hikaru, because you can't take, because obviously the knight is protecting the pawn, and that means that, you know, the idea is of course to push up to try and trade off, and now you've got an open file here. Get your king, get your rook, and again, all-out attack by Hikaru. He'd really gone for a juggler in this game. And here Irina Krush plays queen to e7. So we get g5, we get h takes g5, we get bishop takes g5, and again setting this up nicely. Then we get rook to d8, king to h1, setting up this chance to get going with this rook on the g file. We get bishop to c6, now attacking along this line of the knight. We get knight takes c6, then we get the bishop, rook trades off, and here we get b takes c6. So white is for choice here. Hikaru is definitely has an advantage, but how he finishes it off is really, really beautiful. Because first of all, we get knight to e5. Now, knight to e5 is a lovely move because first of all, we're attacking this pawn, but we're also dropping back the opportunity to drop back here to g4, which would allow a continued x-ray on this knight, pinning it to the queen. And here, with this number of threats, we get a blunder by Irina Krush. She plays knight to c7. And here Hikaru goes bishop takes f6, and then we get the pawn takes on f6. And in this position, Hikaru finds a brilliant move. And it's quite a difficult, brilliant move to find, if you ask me, because because it's a really brilliant move. So can you find it? I'll give you a few seconds. What would you play here? I mean, I think we'd all be looking first of all at rook to g1 check as a possibility. Maybe thinking of bringing our queen in up along the lines, something like that. Yeah, so hard to know. What would you play? Well, in the game, Hikaru plays the brilliant, the really wonderful knight takes f7. Brilliant move. Why is this a brilliant move? Well, you cannot take with the queen because you have bishop to e6. And you think, well, I can just play rook to e8. And that way, if you take, I can take your queen. But of course you can't, because this comes with check. And after king takes and queen to h5, the game is all over. So you think, okay, well, what if I take with the king? Well, if you take with the king, it's not much better because you get queen to e6. And if you go to to f8, well, you're facing checkmate, because after queen to g8 check and king to e7, you get queen to f7 checkmate. So that move is no good either way. So after the king takes here, what if you go to something like g6? Well, then you get rook to g1 check, and you can only go in one of these three spots. That means we've got a ladder checkmate again by Hikaru. So a really wonderful, brilliant move by Hikaru here. So in the game, Irina Krush decides to play rook or knight to d5. Now, rook knight to d5, you think, okay, well, that's a good move. It's blocking off this bishop, which is avoiding all of the problems, or so you would think. But Hikaru finds a second brilliant move here. Can you find the second brilliant move that he plays to win the game? Well, it's the wonderful queen to e6. And this is a brilliant move because if the queen takes the knight here, well, then you go queen to c6. And the computer says at this position, I mean, you're absolutely walking the game here. It's nearly +7 because not only is this rook under attack, all of black's pieces apart from the queen are under attack. You've also got this triple attack on the knight with the bishop, which again would pin the queen to the king. So a really wonderful game showing the advantage of this wonderful opening move of one knight to c3 by Hikaru.